We're gonna build the Killer Clown Popcorn Bazooka, and we're also gonna see if we can actually get it to work. Well, at least shoot popcorn. Alien baby clowns, not included. We're gonna have to start this somewhere, and I figured the barrel was the best place to start, because whatever I'm able to find is gonna determine the proportions of the rest of the bazooka. Found the perfect pipe at a hardware store. It's 4 inches wide, which is exactly what I was hoping for. Cut that opening with the Sawzall. Now let's get some of the details going. The bar across the top is a stack of 2 pieces of wood. Hot glued it at first, and then added some screws to make sure it's not going anywhere. For the front shapes, put some screws into the pipe and rough up the surface. This is gonna help those pieces stay attached. Building this up with smooth-on freeform air. This is a 2-part epoxy that dries lightweight. It's gonna help to make sure that that front end is not gonna be too heavy. If you're using this stuff, be sure to wear gloves. Smooth it out with some alcohol, but we're gonna sand this later, so it doesn't have to be perfect. Now that it's dry, let's do the bottom piece. Fix the gap between the wood and the pipes with some wood filler. For that piece right behind the barrel, I got a wood plaque. It was too long, so did have to trim that down. Also cut the circle out, which was a bad move. I originally intended to create the bevel into the wood using the sander before cutting the circle. When sanding it, the thinner pieces did bust off, so we're gonna reattach that, and that's just our little secret. The main panels of the body were all cut with a glow forge. Added a light etching where some of the details were gonna be on the sides. These 2 pieces I did sand at a bevel, so that way that they can sit at an angle. Let's at least get what we have assembled now. Added some panels to the plaque piece that goes behind the barrel. Rounding all the edges really makes it look more like the one in the movie. Time to cut the back and front panel. We're gonna start with the front since that's the easier one between the 2. Just need to cut out the circle for the barrel to slide into. Glue it down, then round the edges. Going to wait to permanently attach this. The back panel needs to be designed so I can get into the back of the bazooka and get to whatever system we plan on using to blast the popcorn. Figured magnets would be the easiest way to open it, plus it's a perfect excuse to work with some magnets.
Yeah, magnets! Oh!
Created these cutouts to hold them on the panel. Sit the body on top to line up where the magnets will go. These are for the inside. Glued the squares with the cutout to a solid square. Going to epoxy these magnets in place. To make sure that I'm always gluing them correctly, I took a magnet and taped it to the table. Then you can let the magnet get pulled in place, guaranteeing that you will have the right side each time. Plus, it's a fun trick. Just don't get cocky, or you might end up flinging the holder across the room like I did. Now they're set, going to mark the back of each of the panel magnets with an X, and just drop them in one by one. Put the panel back in place, covered with plastic wrap. This is so I can glue the other magnets in place. Everything's dry, time to taper the edges. Make sure you're wearing a mask when you're doing any kind of sanding because this gets pretty messy. Squish some wood filler since there was a couple little gaps I wanted to fix. This back area is where we're gonna be opening that panel, so it has got to be sturdy. We don't wanna end up ripping it off by accident. Put a bunch of screws on the top as well as the back panel. This is gonna give the material something to grab to. Little shrink wrap to protect the corners because we do not want to seal it closed. A touch of hot glue just to keep it in place, and we're gonna go back to that smooth-on freeform air. Really didn't want this area to be too heavy, and in the end it actually helped create a nice balance between the barrel of the bazooka and the back. Did this with a couple batches, and now this stuff, when you're working with large quantities, can get pretty hot. These screws ended up really hot to the touch while it was curing. Good enough for now. Now for the side dials and the little details. Gonna just make that out of the same material. Once it's dry, clean it up and did a little light sanding. Now these 2 small pieces can be applied directly on the bazooka, but the dial I needed one for each side. So instead of sculpting a whole other one, we're gonna mold this. Use some silicone and reinforced it with some plaster bandages. Pop it out, and I did have a couple air bubbles, so we're just gonna patch those up. Now casting it with Smooth-On Smooth Cast 300. Here comes my favorite part. 15 years in effects, and this is still so satisfying. I don't know, maybe I'm a little weird. Okay, attach time. Scratch up the surface for the two-part epoxy and just line it up to the etching. The other dial has the crank, so we're gonna have to drill a hole in the center. Also add those two smaller pieces. We're getting somewhere. Sanded the back semi-smooth, needed a little patching. Also added the 3 half spheres on the top. Found a bolt for the crank and added some tubing since the hole was actually a little wider than it should have been. Attach the bolt and create the handle with a dowel and wood ball. Once the dowel is glued into position, use Apoxie Sculpt to round out the short end. Drilled a hole through the ball so that extra ball on the end wouldn't just pop off. Now I'm making the crank removable. Also, the handle on the barrel is removable, and that is strictly for storage purposes. Barrel handle, took a wood dowel, added the curve to fit against the barrel, also embedded the screw. Attach the barrel with epoxy, and there's a screw to lock it into the wood plaque part. Clean up the seams and add some holes for the curly hose and antenna. Now, before we get back into building all of this, we should probably see if we can even get it to blast popcorn. Now, I've used these emergency bike pumps for blood effects before, so it seemed like the best option. Luckily, I found an HVAC version that had a longer handle, which is perfect for the bazooka handle. Or otherwise, with the other version, we would have to extend the handle somehow, and that's just a whole other set of problems. Some tubing and a funnel to focus the blast of air. The funnel fits perfect in the barrel. You are gonna wanna clamp the tubing since the force of the air can disconnect it. Let's get testing. Now grab your popcorn. Just use duct tape for now because we're only testing it. Loaded it up and the air is just leaking. Not getting any blast of air. Realized the clamp was too far back, so the trigger could not move fully, so let's reposition it. Boom, success. So also gonna have to figure out an easier way to reload these CO2 cartridges. But let's tackle the handle first. The idea is that the CO2 cartridge part is going to sit inside the bazooka handle. Building the handle out of multiple panels of wood, need to keep an eye on the top so it does not get in the way of that trigger. Glue and clamp it all together. Well, that's ugly. Let's shape it. Much better. Added some indentions to the top so it could fit better into the bottom of the bazooka. Need to cut a little more so we can get that trigger in there. Was hoping that a quick connect system was gonna make it a lot easier to remove the CO2 cartridge and reload it, but unfortunately the only ones I could find that would work are way too big and bulky, and that's just not gonna work. So at this point, figured the best option would be to split the handle. And of course, Murphy's Law, I had already mounted the handle onto the body. So now we're going to have to carefully cut it in half without damaging the rest. Luckily, it wasn't as bad as I expected. I'm gonna go ahead and add a ball onto the trigger. The popcorn dome has this small little red cage, and went through a lot of searching to see what the closest thing I could get. Ended up finding Hydroponics Net Cups. Just have to cut off the lip. Now, these are super cheap, but they do come in a pack of 50, and I only need 1. So as for those other 49, I guess we'll have to figure out a future project for those. Made a ball for the top and got a plastic dome off of Amazon. The edges were too wide, so we're gonna round that down a little bit. Also taped it all up to keep it protected till we're ready to permanently mount it. Now there's a bunch of other details, like these little pen clip looking bits that go around the barrel. I couldn't find anything that looks similar, so guess we're gonna have to make them. Got a bunch of these greenhouse clips and put them to a belt sander. Then refined with a Dremel and hand sanding. For the red hose on top, figured I could find a red hose and just put aluminum wire through to give it that coil. First hosing I got off of Amazon was way too rigid and it really looked like crap. Back to searching, found Slingshot tubing. This stuff was awesome and it was exactly what I was hoping for. Fed the wire through and did end up switching this to a much thicker gauge when I went to attach this to the bazooka. Once the wire's in, you're just gonna wrap it around the dowel. Got some balls for the end of this and they're just gonna have to be widened a little bit. Now painting is always my favorite part because this is really when you get to see everything come together. First thing, we're gonna tackle the stripes in the barrel. The base color is just a custom mix of Createx Wicked paints. Did end up custom cutting the painter's tape, and the blue is Krylon spray paint. The pattern on the body I feel like took forever, and did end up having to apply 2 layers. Now to line the globs with a darker shade. The handle is striped, so started with the lightest color, which was green. Still have to paint these other pieces on the side, and we're back to more stripes. Used a piece of PVC pipe to add to the crank, filled it with Epoxy Sculpt, used Vaseline around the outside. Put it in place. More Epoxy Sculpt to create the collar to go around the pipe. Smooth and sand. Paint, paint, paint. Really was hoping to refine the CO2 setup. Unfortunately, painting really ate up so much time, so never really got a chance to test or make more changes to the setup. In a perfect world, would have loved to have tried a few things to see how much force I really could have got out of the popcorn blast. For those antenna pieces, grabbed some wood balls. Decided to use that same slingshot tubing, except this time I got it in green. Fed some brass tubing through because it would be sturdy and still bendable. 1 for in front of the popcorn dome and 2 go on the end of the barrel. Now for more painting, including those clips around the barrel. Once those are attached, time to gloss it all up. Went through a few cans of this because I wanted it super shiny. Now the buttons, I couldn't find the plastic square ones, so I ended up getting 1-inch acrylic cubes and just had to paint those. Wanted this to light up, so created a solder-free system and even made a little holder for the LEDs. Pink foam is added as trim for the base of the squares. And speaking of foam, used thick black foam on the back side, added slices, and glued it down. Now for the dome, I didn't want the popcorn sitting on the same level as the body of the bazooka. Using the circle that was cut out, glued a square foam dowel, painted it all black. Got some paper tape from Amazon that would not stick, so we're just gonna have to use a little glue around the edge of the dome. Use some blue permanent vinyl to finish the dome. Time to dump in some fake popcorn. There's a tutorial in the description if you wanna know how to make this popcorn yourself. Now it looks pretty slick, but will it work? Grab a sleeping bag size of popcorn. Definitely not feeling confident. Well, it worked, but not with the force I was hoping for. So with the help of some friends, we attached it to a compressor and just casually waiting for the compressor to fill. Fail.
Oh.
So just amusing myself to not feel so defeated. Strangely, that had a worse outcome. Back to the CO2 cartridges, which really proved to be finicky and unreliable.
Oh.
Oh, I don't have my gloves on.
Oh.
Well, it didn't blast popcorn as dramatic as in the movie, but it did kind of spit some out. So what do you think? Is this a fail or success? Also, that was the same day for the updated version of my Rudy look. Be sure to head over to the next video and see that all come together, along with seeing the final version that was applied at a monster convention.